This is the Red Podcast.
This is episode number 58. If you've started a business, got something going, but it's not what you thought it would be, is it time to give up? Is it time to move on? On this episode, that's exactly what we're going to talk about. When is it time to move on to a different thing? That's coming up.
This is the Red Podcast. Real entrepreneur development. Make more money, work less, and live a life of freedom. No BS advice that really works. Here's your hosts, David Hooper and Laurel Staples.
David, it's official. We're married.
We are. We think it's official.
We think it's official. We have not received the official certificate.
Right. We had a ceremony, honeymoon, lots of people were there, but we don't know if the minister mailed in the paperwork.
We're just going to assume that he did.
You know, I had a friend once. She was married for a number of years, was going through a divorce, and ended up finding she was not legally married in the first place.
That makes it easy to get a divorce.
Yeah, problem solved, right?
Yeah. Hopefully that won't be our issue.
No.
Yeah. Well, how's it feel to be my husband?
Feels good. Yeah, it's good. It's a little weird. You know, the weirdest part for me on our honeymoon, I was waiting for you. We were in line at actually a Whole Foods in Sedona, Arizona. And the guy's like, "Are you ready to check out?" I said, "Oh, I'm waiting for my wife." And that's when it kind of kicked in.
It's kind of surreal.
Yeah, it's weird to say that.
But it's good. So far, so good.
Yeah, I'm not freaked out or anything.
Not yet.
Nobody had cold feet. Everybody showed up. Very, very smooth. A smooth ceremony. Great honeymoon. Fantastic. We went to Sedona, Arizona for a week. Had Laurel on a dirt bike kind of thing.
ATV.
It's an ATV. Yeah, it's kind of like Mario Kart.
It was awesome.
She was kicking up dust. I was right behind her. I kind of got ill, actually, from sucking in so much dust.
You were literally eating my dust. I mean, it was so awesome for me.
So if you ever go to Sedona, Arizona, you're on a dirt bike, you're on an ATV, take goggles and get you one of those Jesse James bandanas to put around your mouth, because there is a lot of dust in the desert.
David, what is RED?
RED stands for Real Entrepreneur Development. It's for authors, bloggers, writers, musicians, speakers, anybody with a message. If you want to spread your message, this is the place to do it. We'll help you with your time management, organization, building a company. This is where the 4-hour work week really exists. We've got some tips and some tricks, but this isn't really about hacking anything. This is about longevity. So if you like what you're doing, if you want to be around, this is the place to do it.
I'm glad that you said that, because that's kind of what we're talking about today is, if you're going to be around 5, 10, 20 years, are you going to be doing exactly what you're doing now? And this came up in a mastermind group that I'm a part of, where one of the guys in the group is wondering if he should transition from the business that he's in to get into a different business, or what he should do, if he should stick it out or move on. So I thought that would be a great topic for today, because I think if you're an entrepreneur, you're going to go through this at some point. If your business isn't gaining traction, or if you get into a business and it isn't what you thought it would be, is it time to move on, or should you really stick with it?
Yeah, and life changes. For example, we just got married. A few years ago, what worked for me wouldn't really work for me right now. So plans change, people change, businesses change, economies change. We're here to show you how to keep going on with whatever it is that you do, and whatever it is that you do probably will change. So here's how to deal with it.
That's the thing, because in many businesses, when you get started, it's like climbing a hill. And if you stick with it long enough, usually you get over that hump, that hard part, and then it just becomes a little bit easier and things start to flow better. But if you're on that upward climb right now, it could be that you just need to get over the hump, or it could be that you need to take a different path and get on a different hill. And so we're going to talk about how you can figure that out. And that's going to be for you if you're feeling like your business maybe isn't getting the traction, you're not making the money that you want, or if you're just not feeling like it's a good fit for you anymore, this is going to be the episode for you.
Yeah, sometimes it looks better on the outside. Once you get into it, you find out it's really not what you bargained for. And at that time, it's time to look at it.
Has that ever happened to you, David?
Oh, all the time. Yeah. And you know who I see it happen to? And this is really kind of sad. I see it happen to attorneys a lot, because by the time they figure out that they don't like being an attorney, they've gone through years of law school, a lot of them, passed the bar exam. They've got lots of school loans. And then what do? It happens to a lot of people.
Yeah, one of my friends did that. Exactly. She went through law school. She got her first job and was like, this isn't what I want to do, and went into working for nonprofits. So at least with entrepreneurship, you kind of control your own ship and where you're going. So you have more control over what you want to be doing, right, and if you want to change directions.
So we're going to have a discussion about that. How do you know if you should press forward, get over the hump, because there's always a hump, or move on to something different? So the first thing that I asked myself, Laurel, I asked myself, if I had to do this full time, could I live that life? What would it look like? For example, Red Podcast, it's a relatively new venture for us. I've been in broadcasting for a while. You've had a podcast for a couple years at least, but it hasn't been as in-depth as what we're doing now, 3 episodes a week. And we think about that. How can we keep this pace up? Do we like the elements of the work? And what about the non-work elements? Not just when we're talking like we are right now, when we're recording, when we're in the studio, but for a lot of people, it involves travel. The non-work elements could be a lifestyle thing. Do you have time for your family? This certainly takes a lot of time. Do you like the things like, for example, with a podcast, editing, not just the speaking, but what you have to do to get that speech out to people? So those are the things to think about.
I had a client who was a coach once. She was a health coach like I used to be. And that was something that I asked her because she's trying to get her business ramped up. And I said, look, if you had the number of clients that you really want, say it's 20 clients or something like that, what would your life look like? How much would you be working? And once you paint that picture for yourself, is that the life that you want to have? Because I think a lot of people say, yeah, this is great, but it's great maybe if you're doing it part-time during the week and not full time. So you want to look at, okay, if I have those 20 or 50 clients, or if I have all those customers that I want, what is my life going to look like? And is that what I want?
Right. The part-time, as I mentioned earlier, it's looking at it from the outside. Not until you get to the inside do you really know what that's going to be like. You can kind of do that in your head. But sometimes we like a little bit, like I like a little bit of salt in my food, just a little bit, like a little bit of cheese on my burrito. Put too much of it though, either one of those things, it ruins it for me. Sometimes a little bit goes a long way.
That's the thing, and especially with this client and with coaching, you can do coaching, maybe see a couple clients, and that's energizing and that's fun. But when you have to go through your whole week and maybe see 20 clients, that can be totally draining. So if that's the case for you, if you don't feel like going full time with this or having a full schedule of clients or a larger number of customers is going to be a good fit for the lifestyle that you want, you might want to say, hey, maybe it's time for me to move into a different business. Maybe this isn't the model for me, or maybe I need to change my prices or change something about my business so that it is a better fit for me.
Or just keep it part-time. We've talked about the part-time hustle, and sometimes part-time is all that it needs to be. You can go make your money or spend your time somewhere else.
I think next, David, I would say that there are no guarantees. I mean, for any business, for any hill that you choose to climb, there are no guarantees that you will ever reach the top and come down the other side. So I think you have to understand and you have to look at your business like, is the middle part of doing the business, of climbing up the hill, is that exciting to you? Because if it's not, there are no guarantees at the end of the road.
No, absolutely not. I love Stephen Pressfield, and I love a book that he has called War of Art. We've talked about that a lot on this podcast. And he talks about people being in their domains. And he used Arnold Schwarzenegger for an example. He said, is there any doubt that Schwarzenegger would be in the gym even if he were the last man on earth? And there's not. That's where he belongs. And I think about that when we talk about, does the middle sound exciting? Does the work sound exciting. If you're engaged and you would do it even if nobody comes to your speaking engagements, even if not one copy of your book was sold, well, that's a good match for you. If not, you want like the end result, as you're saying, the top of the hill or what's on the other side of the hill. If you have to have that to make that work worthwhile, maybe think about not doing it, because none of those things are guaranteed.
Exactly. I mean, that's why I always work with clients to find a business that they're passionate about. Because there's a big debate. Like maybe you should go after a business idea that's guaranteed to make the money as opposed to something that you're passionate about or that you like doing. And I always say the money comes from passion, because when you have that passion and the middle is exciting to you, that's when you're going to be in it and you're going to be excited about it and you're going to be doing the work that needs to be done. So if you're not in a business where the middle is exciting to you, it might be time to consider another business. And you'll probably get better results if you find one that you're more excited about.
Well, not only will the passion help you get through to the other side, I think one of the things that happens when you have passion is that's when you bring people into your organization. We've all seen those people. They're so excited. Example, Sedona on our honeymoon. Laurel and I are hiking up what they call a vortex. You're out in the middle of the desert and we're hiking up these red rocks. And we ran into this guy. He walks up to Laurel and he says, "Hello, my dear. Here's a gift from the vortex." He hands her a rock in the shape of a heart. And he starts talking to us about the vortex. He says, "I'm going to run ahead of you. You'll hear me playing my flute." And every morning we were staying in a hotel that was right next to this thing. You could hear this guy and actually see him on top of a mountain playing a wooden Indian flute. He was so passionate about it. There was something about him that I was like, wow, that's kind of curious. It makes me want to find out more about this whole vortex thing. If he's that excited about it, he's going to get me that excited about it. Same is true for your business.
Exactly. So if you're not excited about the middle and about the work you have to do now, probably time to move on to find something else.
You're not the best salesman for it.
Exactly. I mean, you're not going to create a profitable business around something that you don't really care about. You're just in it for the money. It's just not going to happen.
Let's talk about thinking ahead. How far do you think ahead when you think, would I continue to do this?
I try to think usually 5 years ahead.
5 years? Sometimes we don't. For Red Podcast, we had an agreement. I think it was about 6 months. We said, we're going to do this for 6 months, and then we're going to reevaluate it. But there's also that balance, I think, like you're talking about, where we are thinking longer, and it's 5 years, for example, maybe a year. Could we see ourselves doing this if it takes off in the way that we want it to in 5 years? I think that's important to look at.
And I think we looked at this venture as a 6-month thing because, again, you might get into a business that you think is going to be great, but when you're actually doing it week in and week out, is it that exciting? And we didn't know. So we said, okay, we're going to give it 6 months. We're going to see if it's a good fit for us. And then we're going to look at that kind of 5-year out thing.
And I think it's worth saying that you and I knew about podcasting. We knew about broadcasting. We sort of knew what we were getting into. Really, the reason we only had 6 months out, 2 reasons. One, we were going to have to be working together, and we have a relationship that's not just business, but also marriage. And 2, just the volume. We started out Red Podcast, and this was planned. We started out 5 days a week. After 25 episodes, 5 weeks, we dropped it down to 3 episodes per week. We had to ask ourselves, can we keep up with this pace? We knew we weren't going to be able to do 5 days a week more than about a month. That's why it was only a month. We weren't sure about 3 days per week.
So if you look at your business right now and look out into the future, look out 5 years from now, and if you are doing it full time, if you do have a full client roster or all the customers that you want, can you see yourself doing it 5 years from now? And if you are, does it allow you to live the lifestyle that you want and do the work that you're passionate about? I think you have to look at both of those.
Exactly. Can you keep up the pace? And think about this, you're changing life. I think things were a lot different for both of us, really, when we were in our 20s. You had a retail store. Obviously, a retail store has to be open a certain amount of hours, a certain amount of days per week. I had a big conference that took me 51 weeks out of the year to plan. It was a 1-week event, so the 52nd week we were running the conference. We didn't get any time off. Great when you're in your 20s, but what happens when you've got a family? What happens when you've got kids? What happens when you get a little older? What happens when you just feel like slowing down? It's something to think about. With that said, we're talking about 5-year goals now. We're talking about changing lifestyles now. If something does work for you now, that's not to say that you have to go way far into the distance. We really don't know what's coming up. If you like it now, I would say go for it. But if you can think ahead, by all means do, because that will help you have a successful transition if something doesn't work for you.
David, you mentioned my retail store, and I just want to quickly kind of tell my story on that. I know I've mentioned it before on this podcast, but when I got into doing retail, I kind of had a vision of what it would be like. It played to a lot of my talents. I thought it would be a great business for me. But when I actually started doing the day-to-day work, where the retail store is open 6 days a week, about probably 8 hours a day, and I have to be there, I have to manage employees, I have to do everything for the store, wear all the different hats, order the clothes, just doing all that stuff day in and day out, it turned out to not be the right fit for me because I wanted more freedom built into my life to do other things. And so it was a tough decision for me to move on from that. But that was one situation where I was like, well, do I stick with it because it's not doing too bad, or do I go and find this other life of freedom that I want for myself and a different business for myself? And you find yourself in that moment where do I move on or do I stay with what I have? But I think you have to use all these questions we've kind of posed today to say, maybe if it doesn't support the lifestyle that you want for the rest of your life, maybe it's time to kind of move on. So that was ultimately the decision that I had to make for my retail store, which was great. I mean, it turned out to be great. It was a hard decision at the time, but it ended up working out.
Yeah, that's what we call the devil you know. And it happens not only in a situation like you just mentioned, Laurel, it happens in relationships. It can happen in day jobs. It can happen with your move from one city to another. It's tough because you don't know what's on the other side of that door when you're walking away from something. Sometimes it's easier to be with something that you know is kind of agitating, but it's easier for you to deal with than the unknown. I think there's an element of trust that it takes to walk away from anything, but I've never seen that fail. When you're taking the leap from something to something else, if you're meant to do it, if you're passionate about it, if you've thought things through, you will find that net once you take the leap.
And I want to add to that too, David, is when I left the retail store and I decided to close it down, that was the one time I think in my life where I didn't have the next plan. So you mentioned like dating people. Before I met you, I was in a relationship and had to break it off with that person and had a gap in between meeting the next person. And that happened the same with the retail store, as I had to close it down knowing it wasn't the right fit for me, but not knowing what was next. And you do have to take that leap into the unknown. And that's why I think it's really important to trust your gut feeling on it, because that's really what it comes down to a lot of the time.
Yeah, it really is about trust. And I think that's one of those things that you can develop. Always going to be scary, but just trusting little bitty things in your life that maybe aren't such a big deal, like maybe trusting that you're going to find a parking space, or trusting that you're going to find a ride to work, maybe trusting that you're going to find a parking space. Maybe you don't have a car. Maybe it's trusting that the bus is going to come and the schedule is going to be right. You see those people that try to, I'll say, micromanage every little thing. They've got to know how every little part of the system works. There's something about just showing up and trusting, and then once you can do that on little situations, you can do it in larger situations.
And I think trusting your gut is something that entrepreneurs have to get really good at, because we talked about there are no guarantees. There's a lot of times no finish line. I mean, you have to know that you're going in the right direction by looking inward towards the inside of yourself and trusting yourself and trusting that things are going to work out. So I think that's a huge element in all this.
Something that I think helps with career transitions especially, but also relationship transitions. If you think about if you're going from one relationship to another, well, the next one is going to be better because you've learned things from the previous relationship. Same thing with your job. You are developing skills in even the wrong job that you're in. You're developing communication skills, maybe typing, maybe computer skills, sales skills. Those are going to help you when you move forward to the next thing. You're not starting at square one. The things that you've learned in the previous job, even if it has nothing to do with what you're doing now, they're going to help you.
I think that's what gets scary for me, definitely making transitions as an entrepreneur is, oh my gosh, I'm starting from zero. And that's just something you really want to keep in mind is you're not. You have learned so much. You've climbed higher up the mountain. You're just taking a fork in the road, but at least you're higher up the mountain while you're doing it.
Something I think when it comes to career transitions is identities. For a long time, I was known as a music business guy, probably still known to a lot of people as a music business guy. But Red Podcast is part of that jump. There's more to me than just my marketing of musicians and entertainers and authors. Identity is tough, though, because if you've got a reputation, if you like being recognized, and then you have to say, I'm not doing that anymore, well, that's a little weird. Sometimes I think people stick around things because they're known. It's kind of the devil you know. And I think that's something to look at. Like going from one job to another, I have never seen somebody make a transition where there wasn't a solid net that would catch them when it comes to identity. Your new identity will be there.
That's always hard when you're trying to update your social media profiles and LinkedIn. And it's like you were this and now you're this, and you're kind of creating your own persona online. You just got to roll with it and know that it's going to work out.
It's hard all the time. You think back to high school, where you're going from junior high to high school, or maybe one school to a different school, and you're the geek or the dweeb, and you think, I'm going to be the cool guy when I go to the next school. And it's a little bit weird, right? Because your internal mechanism is telling you you're one way, but you want to be another way. And it's a little bit uncomfortable, but nobody's going to know at the new place unless you tell them. And the same thing with your identity. People forget very, very quickly. And sooner than you think, what you were doing or what you're doing now that you want to transition from, that's going to become a thing of the past.
I don't know. The kids in 8th grade used to call me Daria. Do you remember that cartoon?
Yeah.
And then when I got to high school, I wasn't like that at all. I mean, 7th and 8th grade is really awkward. So it wasn't like that at all. And people still called me that. But it was
well,
okay.
Maybe the business world is more forgiving than high school, hopefully.
I think so. I think people forget. Most people don't even care. So
I think the big idea here when you're looking at, is it time to give up? Is it time to move on or transition? We hear this saying, the grass is always greener. And the big idea is that it's not always greener. It's still grass. It's just different grass.
I like that. I wrote about that on my blog a while ago. It's just different grass somewhere else. You just have to make sure it's the grass you want to be standing on. It's not better. It's not worse. It's just you have to make sure it's the right one for you.
You've heard the saying, no matter where you go, there you are. You're the one common denominator. A lot of people try to go for a geographic cure in their lives by moving from one place to the next. I think a lot of people try to do the same thing when it comes to business. They start blaming the business. Well, it's not a good time. The bad economy affected this business, so therefore I had to go to the next one. Well, sometimes, but not always. You are the one common denominator no matter where you go. There you are. I think these skill sets that we've talked about here on this podcast episode, develop those, get those together, get those mindsets in order. No matter where you go, you're going to be okay.
Then you can do anything.
Do you have questions, comments, want to reach out to me or Laurel? You can do that via our website at redpodcast.com. If you've got episode suggestions, that's the place to do it. We're trying to build a community of real entrepreneurs. That's why we call it Real Entrepreneur Development. And if you go to iTunes and search for Red Podcast, you can help us build this community by leaving a review. That helps us come up more easily and more frequently in search engine results. Bring more people on board. We also are helped when you recommend Red Podcast to a friend. If you do that, we would appreciate it. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time on another episode of the Red Podcast.
You've been listening to Red Podcast, Real Entrepreneur Development. Subscribe today using iTunes, Stitcher, or via RSS at redpodcast.com.